Welcome everyone to another edition of the Cultures for Health podcast, where we discuss all things related to fermentation. We believe that the best fermented foods and beverages are DIY, and we are here to supply you with the tools you need to get started, guidance through the process, and to help you achieve your fermentation goals. I'm Wendy, your host for today, and in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you how to maintain your Kombucha SCOBY forever. We'll talk about how to take care of your SCOBYs and create a home or a hotel for your SCOBYs where they can live when you want to take a break from making kombucha, you want a place to store extra SCOBYs, as it's always a good idea to have backups in case something goes wrong, or if you want to make a supercharged starter tea that you can use for future batches of kombucha. If you're familiar with making kombucha, you know that nearly every time you make a new batch, your SCOBY replicates itself. The mama SCOBY makes a baby SCOBY, which becomes a mother SCOBY, which makes a baby SCOBY, which becomes a mother SCOBY, and thus the circle of kombucha life continues. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, as having extra SCOBYs is a good thing. It's always good to have a backup or two in case you lose a brew to mold or the culture ceases to be active. Extra SCOBYs are also useful for experimenting with different teas and or sugar blends. But what are you to do with all of these extra SCOBYs? You have a few options. You could keep the SCOBY layers together and just use both in another batch. You could use the baby for a new batch and just throw away or compost the mother SCOBY. You could start another brewing jar with a baby SCOBY. You could always give away the SCOBY plus the starter liquid to a friend. You could make SCOBY fruit leather or other edible food. Or you could start a SCOBY hotel to store the extra SCOBYs, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So what is a SCOBY hotel and how do you start one? Well, the SCOBY hotel is the place where your SCOBYs rest. A SCOBY hotel is just another jar with your extra SCOBYs stored in some kombucha or sweet tea. To make a hotel, you basically follow the steps you would normally take to make kombucha. The recipe I'm about to give you is for a gallon jar, but you can adjust if necessary for different size containers. You can use any size glass jar that you have as long as all your SCOBYs would fit in it. So you'll begin by bringing a gallon of water to a boil. You add 4 to 5 black tea bags, or the equivalent in loose tea. You let steep for 5 to 10 minutes. You'll remove the tea, add 1 cup of white sugar and stir to dissolve. Then you'll let cool to room temperature and pour it in a glass container, aka the hotel. Add the SCOBYs. Then you're going to add 1 cup of starter tea, which is the reserved kombucha from a previous brew. Cover with a tight weave, breathable cloth or coffee filter to allow airflow, but to also keep the dust and insects out. Secure with a rubber band. Some people like to cover their SCOBY hotels with an airtight lid to prevent evaporation, and that's okay too. Store your SCOBY hotel in a warm, dry place for up to 2 weeks. Replace the kombucha regularly with a fresh batch. The finished kombucha can be poured off and consumed or discarded. Please note that kombucha stored in a hotel with numerous SCOBYs ferments much more quickly than normal and is much more potent. If you wish to drink it, it may be ready sooner than you'd usually expect. Continue to add your SCOBYs over time as you accumulate them. SCOBY hotels can go untouched at room temperature for months on end. I've even heard instances of people forgetting theirs for a year or longer without any issues. I'd still recommend at least checking on your hotel every few months or so though. If the liquid ever looks like it's fully drying up, you should feed your SCOBY hotel with sweet tea or unflavored kombucha. Here is a SCOBY hotel food recipe. Steep 1 teaspoon of black tea in 2 cups of water and add 2 tablespoons of cane sugar. Let cool to room temperature and strain all the tea out before putting in the SCOBY hotel. Or better yet, you can feed your SCOBY hotel with tea from finished batches of kombucha right after you finish a first fermentation cycle. That way your hotel is always getting a good amount of kombucha tea to keep the SCOBYs moist, and you're essentially creating a well of supercharged starter tea you can use for all your future batches of kombucha. It's unlikely that your SCOBY hotel will get moldy because the SCOBYs make it very acidic and inhospitable to mold. But if something does go wrong and it gets moldy, you will have to throw it all out. There's no salvaging something moldy. But no biggie, just start over. If a SCOBY turns black or has black patches, well, sorry to say that means it's died. You should toss that too. So we want to make sure our SCOBYs last a long time and continue to be healthy. So what are some do's and don'ts of SCOBY care? It is important to feed the SCOBYs with some fresh sugar tea to keep them happy and healthy. Or you could just top up with freshly harvested plain kombucha. A good time to do this is at the same time you clean out the hotel, which I like to do every couple months or so. I just get another clean jar with clean hands, transfer the SCOBYs one by one while checking each one at the same time. Do keep the brown, stringy, yeasty bits on your SCOBY. Don't try to clean them off. Those yeasts help create carbonation. If you have yeast overgrowth, meaning if it's covering most of your SCOBY, you can remove some of it, but don't get rid of it all. These brown bits are not mold. Mold is usually green and fuzzy and would appear at the top of the brew. If you do ever get mold, like I said, you'll have to toss out the entire batch. Kombucha loves to grow. Even in the hotel, a new layer will form across the top. The longer it sits, the thicker the layer. If the SCOBY gets too thick, fresh oxygen cannot reach the liquid below. Thinning or trimming it down to a smaller size will keep the oxygen flowing and prevent stagnation. So I recommend thinning and trimming your SCOBY. Make sure you use clean hands or scissors to trim the SCOBYs or separate them from each other. This is fine if they're getting too large or if you'd like to split them up to move some to a SCOBY hotel or share with a friend. You can't hurt your SCOBY by ripping it or cutting it. Its shape doesn't matter since new ones will always take the shape of the surface of whatever container you place it in. Do reuse your SCOBYs. They can be used several times before they get old. Mine turn a darker brown as they age, but you can honestly keep reusing them until they look too dark, too dry, or start to lose firmness. Do keep your SCOBY hotel at room temperature. Between 65 to 85 degrees works, but mid to high 70s is ideal for the healthiest cultures. Too cold and it could go dormant. Too hot and they could die. A temperature range of 65 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit will keep the kombucha culture adequately active. Dipping below this range can cause the culture to become sluggish, creating a less acidity that would ward off pathogens. Do keep the kombucha brew away from other fermentation projects to avoid microbial cross-contamination. Do use clean containers and utensils. Do use a live SCOBY and starter liquid. Dehydrated or refrigerated SCOBYs are harder to reanimate. If your SCOBY hotel is really full, you may find that you'll need to push down the SCOBYs from time to time. The SCOBYs still produce carbon dioxide and the air may push one or two up away from the liquid. Don't keep your SCOBY hotel in a moist cupboard. That could harbor mold. Don't keep your SCOBYs or your SCOBY hotel in the fridge. Cold temperatures make SCOBYs go dormant and put it at risk for mold. If you keep your SCOBYs in the fridge, then take them back out, it may be difficult for your bacteria and yeast to wake back up and start acidifying. That puts your brews at risk for developing mold as well. Next, I'd like to discuss how flavorings can negatively impact your SCOBY. Although this is a contentious topic among home brewers, I believe you should keep flavorings, oils, and extracts away from your kombucha SCOBY. This means no flavored or herbal teas at your SCOBY hotel or during the initial fermentation. Flavorings in general can damage and weaken your SCOBY over time, even if they're natural. Using flavored teas may work for a few batches, but problems frequently don't appear until several SCOBY generations later. People drink delicious brews and then wonder why they got mold. It's a fairly typical approach to weaken your SCOBY and create a cultural imbalance. This is because SCOBY can only survive on three things: plain, actual tea, that is not herbal teas or infusions, cane sugar, and water. You're feeding your SCOBY items it may not be able to digest if you add other substances to the mix. It also has the potential to disrupt the bacteria-yeast interaction. It may make it more difficult for the sweet tea to acidify and ferment into kombucha, especially if the flavors are essential oils, which have an antibacterial impact and will destroy the bacteria in your kombucha. Because a flavored batch of first fermented kombucha can typically yield good kombucha at least a few times, I believe a lot of people believe it's fine to use flavorings. However, the long term is the issue. Problems don't always show up right away. Using peppermint or chamomile tea, for example, you might be able to brew a successful batch of kombucha. You might be able to brew 3 or 4 batches, but your SCOBY may begin to show indications of weakness over time, and you may experience issues such as lack of fizz, too much yeast, or worst of all, mold. Problems can sometimes take multiple SCOBY generations to manifest. What else can you do with your SCOBY Hotel? Well, my SCOBY Hotel gives me the flexibility to pause and start my brews on my schedule, even if I'm going on vacation or taking a bucha break for a few months. With the SCOBY Hotel, I'll always have SCOBYs handy and a good stock of starter tea that's just getting stronger and stronger the longer I let it sit. And I can just leave it alone and come back to it whenever I'm ready. And of course, SCOBY Hotels give you a good stockpile of SCOBYs to share with others or to try some experimental batches. Spare SCOBYs are great for trying batches with flavored teas in the first fermentation or break other rules of kombucha, because if something goes wrong with a batch, you won't feel bad about wasting a SCOBY because you can always just toss it and grab another. If you don't think you'll ever have a use for your extra SCOBYs, you can use your SCOBY Hotel to make Kombucha Vinegar. It is strong. It can even make for strong starter liquid for a new kombucha batch, but beware, since it is strong, your brew will probably ferment faster than usual. You could also feed the SCOBYs to your chickens or horses or other farm animals and dogs if you have enough backup stockpiled. You could compost it in your garden, as acid-loving plants love a good SCOBY fertilizer. And of course, you can make SCOBY fruit leather and other food items. If you need to take a long-term break from your kombucha, and I'm talking more than 6 weeks, there are a couple options. Option 1 is to store your SCOBYs in the hotel and feed them every 4 to 6 weeks. Fresh sugar tea is preferable as it provides all the nutrients the SCOBY needs to survive and thrive during the break. If adding sweet tea is not an option, adding only sugar should keep the SCOBY going for a few cycles before the SCOBY begins to suffer. But note that over time, liquid will evaporate from the jar and should be replaced. Option number 2 is to dehydrate your kombucha SCOBY. SCOBYs can be dehydrated by placing them on a sheet of unbleached parchment paper and allowing them to dry in a warm spot around 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit until they are the consistency of jerky. Drying several SCOBYs is a good idea as the process isn't normally very precise and there is a failure rate. Once the SCOBYs are dehydrated, place them in a sealable plastic bag and store them in the refrigerator, not the freezer. Dehydrated SCOBYs will generally survive in the refrigerator for at least 3 months. Once you are ready to begin making kombucha again, follow our instructions and how-to video on how to rehydrate the SCOBY at our website. Lastly, I'd like to talk about how your SCOBY Hotel can be a source for a supercharged starter tea. This is actually my favorite feature in my SCOBY Hotel. Every time I finish a first fermentation cycle, I take 1 to 2 cups of that unflavored kombucha tea and place it in my SCOBY Hotel, as I mentioned previously. I never have to create a separate batch of sweet tea to feed my hotel this way. My hotel is solely reliant on the completed kombucha batches that I produce on a regular basis. When I have extra SCOBYs, I put them in the SCOBY Hotel as well. As a result, my 1-gallon jar is frequently half filled with SCOBYs and half filled with plain, unflavored kombucha tea, which is acidifying at a quick rate due to the sheer volume of all those SCOBYs. My SCOBY Hotel's kombucha frequently tastes like vinegar and smells quite acidic, which is perfect for using as super strong, bacteria-rich, and yeast-rich starter tea in my future batches of kombucha. So anytime I want to make a new batch of kombucha, I steep my tea as usual with sugar. And once I add water and once the temperature is right, I take a SCOBY from my hotel along with 1 to 2 cups of my super acidic starter tea from my SCOBY Hotel. It perfectly acidifies my brew. I've always had perfect batches of delicious kombucha with beautiful, healthy SCOBYs ever since I've maintained my SCOBY Hotel this way. When properly maintained, a SCOBY will last indefinitely. So what are you waiting for? Start your SCOBY Hotel today with Cultures for Health. The best way to store your SCOBYs is in a SCOBY Hotel, and the easiest way to create one is with Cultures for Health. We've got the largest selection of fermentation products on the web. From tools to starter culture to even kombucha flavor kits, we have everything your kombucha brewing heart desires. If you're new to the fermentation game, your best option is to start with one of our kombucha starter kits. This kit has everything you need to start brewing kombucha at home immediately and comes with high quality tools that will become mainstays in your kitchen for years to come. If you've been brewing for a while, we have tons of other amazing options for you to choose from, including tons of different starter cultures, tools, and amazing flavor kits. These flavor kits will take your kombucha game to the next level and make you fall in love with brewing kombucha all over again. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us for another episode of the Cultures for Health podcast. I hope that I've managed to teach you how to maintain your kombucha SCOBY to be enjoyed forever, or at least for a long time to come. We'll see you next time.